Ileana is an executive and career transformation strategy coach, a DES catalyst, a Hispanic advocate, and a #1 Amazon bestselling author. An international motivational speaker with over 20 years of global experience with Fortune 500 companies. I will not take more of your time, Ileana, because I want to hear more about your conversation with Emiliana. So please take the stage.
Thank you. Thank you so much to my team for this wonderful day. This is our last session. It's not our last event of the day. So we invite everybody to stay also after the event. I think we still have one more, which is at 6 o'clock, right, Carola? But it's just been a full day of really great sessions. And now we have this powerful conversation. So I couldn't be more excited for our fireside conversation this afternoon at the Latina Summit with activist, feminist, entrepreneur, and CEO of the Women's March Foundation, and all-round hero and powerhouse Latina, Emiliana Guereca. Emiliana was the driving force behind the 2017, 18, and 19 official women's marches in Los Angeles, and she devotes much of her time to advocacy programs for women's rights, Latino education, and gender equality, and has served as the bridge between community organizations and coalition building that spans national levels. Emiliana, it's just such an honor to have you here with us today. And this is was very just the tip of the iceberg overview of who you are and all the amazing things that you've accomplished. So I would love to kick off this conversation by asking you to tell us about yourself and share with us your amazing story.
Hi, everyone. I'm Emiliana. Thank you for attending. Thank you for inviting me, sharing a little bit about my story. So, as you can see, I have a very Latina name, Emiliana. I was named after Emiliano Zapata. I was supposed to be a boy. So I've been fighting for that gender justice and equity since I was born. I grew up in Chicago. I am one of 13 kids. Yes, one of 13 kids. I'm Mexican. I was brought into the United States when I was a kid. Growing up in Chicago, I was not Latina enough. In Chicago, you see a lot of Puerto Rican, you see a lot of Nicaraguan. And then I grew up in an area that was called Cabrini Green. So I grew up in Black culture. So around that time growing up in Chicago, we didn't see a lot of Mexicans. Now is a different story. But what I do remember specifically about growing up in Chicago with a name like Emiliana was that I needed to be an unapologetic Latina. That means that I was not an Emily. That means that I was not a different name. My mom would say, do you think Emiliano Zapata will let them call him Emily? I'm like, that's a lot for a little kid. However, we did grow up with the sense that we were unique, that we were special, and that we should be proud of that. You know, my mom's name is Aurelia. My dad's name is Onesimo. It takes a lot of courage to walk around with those names and be asked to assimilate. We weren't having any of that. We were all unapologetic Latinos back then. I'm going to age myself. Back then in the 80s and 90s, where that was not seen. We weren't, this is when they started using Hispanic name, right? Now it's Latina, Latinx. However we chose to identify, we needed to make sure that we were proud of that. I attended DePaul University as well as UCLA. I am currently, will be going back to Harvard for a degree in public policy. And I am an entrepreneur. When I say I'm an entrepreneur, I'm telling you that I started my first business at 18 and drove to Los Angeles with $200 in my pocket to finish university. And in between, I started a business before I finished UCLA. So that's a little bit about me. I'm going to ask you to tell me where you're joining me from. What are you doing today? And if you're drinking anything. I've got sparkling water because it's 65 in LA. And I was just telling Emiliana that I felt like it was cold. And I'm like, oh my God, I've lost my sense of Chicago weather. But that's a little bit about me.
Thank you, Emiliana. And I'm drinking agua de Jamaica because I love that, just like the flavor and not losing that. Although it's very hard to, come by that kind of flavor in New England. Thank you for sharing like such, your upbringing, and you bring something that I hadn't really thought of, and that's like being proud not only from our heritage or where we come from, but you bring up the power of our names, and I hadn't thought about that. I hadn't thought about that as being something that in a way resonates with who we are, and can talk about that. So I think that's thank you for bringing that up. And you talk about these different struggles that you went through, starting from just like going to LA to go to college. What have been more of the struggles in your career that were the most formative?
I think a lot of the struggles for me was about starting a business as a woman, as a young woman, being the first of a lot of things, right? I was the first one to go to university. I was the first one to start a business. And what that means for the Latina, what that means is that we don't have a lot of support. Most people say, oh, borrow from your parents, borrow from my parents. No, they're probably borrowing from me at that time. But realistically speaking, is being in a very male dominated space. But aside from that, being in a space that is new to you, being the first of a business owner means you don't necessarily know how to go out and take a small business loan, right? My first small business loan, I'm not going to mention the bank, but the banker asked me, are you going to have kids anytime soon? Because you know that once you have kids, most people don't continue with their business. How sexist. And that would never be asked of a man. But I remember that first loan. I also do think that, I co-own restaurants. I also own an event production company. And those are still very male dominated spaces. And so that means that it was up to me to make sure that I brought in more women into the space. But on top of that, brought in more Latina women or more Latinos, because that was just a space that did not have the Latino lens, or that they were even thinking about that. I think when we look at what diversity and inclusion looked like in the 80s and 90s, and in my opinion, we're a little bit going back to that now. What we saw was that there was a black and white situation. And so it's like, no, Latinos exist, our culture exists. And so let's talk about what that looks like in terms of diversity and inclusion. I co-produced Coachella years ago, and we were the first group to bring in Latino acts at Coachella. And that was huge for us, because it made it seem like there weren't Latino acts out there, but they were. And so it was for us proving that Latinos needed to be on those stages, that Latinos needed to be represented, and who better than us to bring them in? I lost Elena. We are having technical difficulties, I think.
Liana is just joining. Yes.
Oh, Zoom. That's part of it.
I'm back.
I'm back. Hi.
Sorry about that. Okay, I think I'm done, and I'll be able to put this better. Give me 1 second. Okay, thank you. You were talking about these something that stuck to me with what you said is about these traditional gender roles and the expectations, and especially as women, whether we're originally born in the US, whether we've come to the US from our countries of origin. And somebody even I saw putting on the chat, your experience happened many years ago, but we're still seeing some of those experiences happening today. And I remember, I'm a chemical engineer, and I studied back in Mexico chemical engineering. And like you, I went the first day, like very happy going into college. The first day you're all excited. And then the teacher at 7 o'clock in the morning said, all you women, which were very few, in a chemical engineering class of all men, told us like to just pick our things and go to the admissions office to change our career, because this was not a career for women. And especially if we were going to get married, like our husbands were going to take care of everything. So like, not waste your parents' money, just go and change. And that marked me at the time a lot, because I was like, what does he think? Like there is no trust, and you want to stand up, you want to like go against it, but there's still like this voice, this inner voice of maybe he's right. Like you still, to this day, sometimes I still doubt some of those things that people tell us. And although on the outside, you want to be the superhero or the shiro, but on the inside, I still carry a lot of those expectations or traditional roles of who we are. And one of the things that I admired a lot when I first, met you and you shared your story as an activist was exactly that. Like just the word activist to me was like, oh my God, like that's something that I don't know if I would be able to do. But you've clearly, like, that's part of who you are. And I would love if you can share, what that means to you and how you've lived through that.
So I didn't consider myself an activist. I didn't. I considered myself a community organizer. And I think my activism started early on. I just didn't name it that, right? My first activist situation was when I was 12. We were advocating for with my parents, and I'm part of that generation and culture that would translate for my parents. My parents did not speak a lot of English, but they wanted to know why we couldn't live in a certain neighborhood in Chicago. They were redlining. And so we took them to court. We took these landlords to court with my little broken English at 12. But I was being an activist. I was asking why we couldn't live in the neighborhood. What was the circumstance? We had the income, we had everything. And so they finally said, there's nothing wrong. It's just that you're coming from a district that was historically Black, which means you have no money. So the bias was there. So I was advocating for housing at 12. And as I grew into my career of event production, of entrepreneurship, I didn't realize that along the way, I was still being an activist by making sure that I always spoke up about a production having more women, having more Latinos in the production teams, having more managers, even at restaurants that were women, that were Latinas, right? So I didn't realize that until the 2016 election, when, I co-founded the Women's March Foundation. And then it was like, well, you're an activist. And I was like, oh, okay. But I've been doing that since I was 12, because that was part of who I was and part of how I grew up, which is, if there is a wrong, you must speak up and we must figure out how to move forward. I think we're all activists.
And I love, your reflection on that, because I think you're right. Maybe some of these things that we're already doing, we don't know that we're doing, or we don't refer them or reference them to something that already exists. And there are other things, like I've been living in the US for the last 10 years. And I just realized that I was Hispanic or Latino, whatever it is, only 3 years ago. Like I really never had because in the environment that I was in, it was mainly white. So I didn't see myself as Hispanic or Latino. I was just like one more there until you meet other people and you realize, oh, this is actually who I am. So the not knowing what you don't know, I think it's important. And do you feel that that has something to do, or if not, like what could be the biggest barriers or challenges that we face as a community from working together? Because we have the sense of familia and supporting each other, but then when it comes to community, that doesn't necessarily happen, and we don't bring that into really honing in as a community. What have you seen?
I think that one of the biggest takeaways that I always have on the type of work that I'm currently doing with Women's March Foundation is that it is our responsibility really to build a pipeline of leaders. And I've never had someone bring me into a room that says, I want to introduce you to so-and-so. And yet here I am with women in Boston that have decided to bring me into the room, right? And so what that does for me is it helps me spread the message. But now in turn, next time I'm somewhere else, I'm gonna remember the women from Boston, right? Who can I bring with me along the way? But also knowing that there is no wrong way to lead. As long as you are leading and bringing more women, bringing more Latinas with you or Latinos with you, that's critical. I think what I've experienced is that a lot of folks think, well, I've checked the box already. I have one Latina in the room. That's not enough. We need to make sure that we are always building a pipeline, but more than anything, introducing people. If I know someone that you want to know, say, hey, I need you to meet Ileana. I need you to meet Carola. So making sure that that has value. And I think we were never taught sort of to do that because where is our pipeline for Latina leadership, right? When you look around leadership, you're like, okay, we have Alejandra Ocasio, we have Catherine Cortez, you have a few women, but who else can we bring up? So I always ask people to introduce. And if you have someone that you know of, introduce them to another person, introduce them to another Latina, so that we are always raising leaders. And I always do say this to my kids. When someone mentions a Latino name, ask, what do they lead? Why? Because it's already putting them in a leadership position and not just a job, right? What do they lead? Oh, they lead this, so that you are always elevating Latinos, because otherwise we are just seen as a workforce, when in reality we're leading a lot of sectors in the United States.
I love that question, and I'll definitely use it now with my kids and with the people around me. I think it's so powerful to think about all of us as leaders, no matter where we are in an organization, in a community, in a group, what age we are, it really doesn't matter. I think you're right. We are all leading in some way or form and setting the stage and opening the doors for others to do different things. Tell us a little bit more about the Women's March Foundation. I know that you had like a really impactful growing trend, and COVID hit, and I think that sort of threw a wrench in all of us, but would love to hear more about what's in the works and what's coming forward.
Ooh, so the Women's March Foundation for us started during the whole Trump 2016. We organized a big march in 2017. I'm based out of Los Angeles. We currently lead about 52 chapters. We are inclusive, but our main goal is to have women of color in leadership, because what we are taught about feminism and who belongs in feminism has never included Latinas, has always been a white force. Even as I was attending high school or college, right? We talked about what does feminist look like? And I just never thought it included me. I didn't realize that I was already working towards that, right? And so adding those layers is what we feel that we'll build a feminist future for Latinas, for women of color. What are we doing currently? Whew, besides marching? We were registering voters across the country. We have what we call voter squads, which are led by women that register folks across the country. But we also are working on a very ambitious plan of a feminist street initiative. And what that means is that we are working across different states and making sure that some of the streets in our country are named after women, specifically women of color. So currently we're working with naming 2 streets, one in Sacramento, one in Los Angeles, after Dolores Huerta. Then Luisa Moreno, Barbara Carrasco. So we are making sure that we have not just taken to the streets, but we are making sure that there are streets named after women. Because if we don't see ourselves like that, then we don't belong, right? We belong there as well. And when we look at the streets across the country, we have like 1% named after women. And yet we're out here making history. So we're working on that feminist street initiative. And we basically did that just as France has done it. France fought with its government to make sure that streets were named after women. And so we are embarking on that. We're in our 2nd year of that, and we are working on 2 streets currently. So wherever you live, reach out to us. We're ready to get some streets named after women.
That's awesome. We definitely will put all that information also for everybody that's sharing with us. And you talked earlier about, we're all activists in some way or form. And sometimes I've heard from women and sometimes even men, Latinos, that it's like, I have the energy, I want to do something that's not my 9 to 5. I really want to be an advocate. I really want to be maybe an activist. I really want, but I don't know where to start. And what would you share in terms of insights to somebody that just wants to, but doesn't know how to?
I would say to find your purpose. And most people say find your passion. I would say no, I would say find your purpose. I think that we all have a purpose, whether it is advocating for women's rights or maybe advocating for animal rights, advocating for the environment, which affects Latinos more than anything. So I think finding that purpose and plugging into a nonprofit, most people don't realize, but most nonprofits run on volunteer work. And so I think finding that purpose, plugging in with nonprofits, and now it's a little bit easier, even with social media, even just starting a group on Facebook, on Instagram, to advocate for that, what is your purpose, right? And I think it's going back. Maybe your purpose is to elevate Latino entrepreneurs. Maybe your purpose is to to talk about environmental justice, reproductive justice. So I think finding that piece that really speaks to you and finding those local organizations that work on that. I know one of my sisters personally, her big mission is housing for people, because we're in Chicago, she's in Chicago, and her big thing is every November, December, she makes caldo de pollo and she's out there with some of the soup kitchens, because that's her purpose. She says, my purpose is to make sure that house folks have food. And she volunteers 4 hours a week and then more when she has vacation time. So finding your purpose, I think, is critical.
I'm absolutely, I'm all about purpose. So I love what you're saying. This Hispanic Heritage Month in particular, at least from my point of view, I've seen more people getting involved, not only Latinos, but, allies and people that are interested of learning more and supporting and helping. And one of the things that I've seen is how is an ally that, again, is interested in advocating and supporting, what do you see it from their point of view, especially as leaders and within, powerful corporations and powerful organizations, that they're already there. Because this sense of community and this power of us extends beyond just us as Latinos. I think it extends to all of us coming together for our culture and for others as well. What would you recommend them as leaders and as allies? How can they also get involved?
I'm going to say to take it a step further, not just be an ally. I'm going to say to be a conspirator, to put together and conspire to do better for Latino folks, not just be an ally. To me, an ally, somebody says, okay, that's cool, it's going to be okay. Be a conspirator. Go out there and advocate for more pay for women. Latina women make 54 cents on the dollar. Be that conspirator that says, hey, she needs to make a full dollar. Right? Be that conspirator that says, hey, for Hispanic Heritage Month, let's make sure that we buy from Latina businesses. Let's make sure that we are putting them at the forefront for more than just that month, right? So I'm going to say to the allies and to those that know allies, say, hey, I need you to come aspire with me in order to bring me to equity, because that is what we're missing. We're missing equity. And it is those leaders that we need to nudge and say, hey, don't just be an ally, conspire with me in order to get to equity. And now conspiring requires us to be brave, because we may actually get in a little bit of trouble, but it's worth it. Ask folks to really, really work toward that equity beyond just telling you they're an ally.
Sorry, I'm on my phone and I'm trying to use the mute here and unmute here. But that's what we do, right? We just go with the flow. What are you seeing from the younger generations? I mean, I have two teenage kids that I just see them, their background and what they're living is obviously completely different than what I lived. But not only because of that, but I think just in general, it's a more conscious, or at least that's what I'm seeing. It's a more conscious awareness of the we versus the I in a lot of cases. What are you seeing from your end and in the work that you're doing?
I think from my perspective, I am seeing the younger generation be braver and more authentic to who they are as Latinos and bringing your entire self to it. I think it takes courage and being brave about being unapologetic Latino, right? The word Latinx, I was telling my sister, I said, I'm Latinx, I'm in Los Angeles. She's like, who's Latinx? What is that? But that is an inclusive word made up by a young woman that was going to college and said, hey, I don't identify as Hispanic. I don't identify as this, hence Latinx, right? So Hispanic, Latinx, Latina, we can be all of that, and that takes courage to be unapologetic. So I think youth is really, really embracing the unique identities that we have, whether we were born in another country or were born in the United States. I think that it's critical that we know our history and our identity, and I think our youth is really embracing that, which I love.
You talk about being unapologetic, and I think I can relate a lot to that in some way, but there are also those moments where the fear still creeps in, or the self-doubt still, comes in, or these inner voices of, are we really enough? Or am I at the level of, somebody else? It could be men, it could be, another white woman. And I know that sometimes I still pull back. I still sort of sometimes like hunch, or without noticing, I still pull back. Have you felt that way? How do you overcome like that imposter syndrome kind of feeling that sometimes still, no matter how much we try, it still seems to be there?
Right. So I actually just wrote a small article about imposter syndrome and really about how it affects Latina women and why it affects us more. Imposter syndrome affects us more because we are being compared to white women. We are not white women. We are Latinas, and we're good enough, we're smart enough, and we've got this. So I think what happens is society has started comparing us to something that it shouldn't be compared to. We are unique, right? We are unique. And I mean, we speak Spanglish, we speak full English. Some of us don't speak Spanish. That's okay. It's enough. We are enough as Latinas. So the imposter syndrome really comes from being compared to someone other than. And so when we look back and think, I'm okay, I'm a Latina. Unapologetic means I make mistakes, I fix them, and I move on. However, as a Latina, I'm strong, I'm resilient, and I'm going to move on. Does it mean it's not going to creep up? No, it may creep up, but go pull yourself back, shift your crown a little bit, stand up straight, and we got this.
I love that, especially the crown. I think that definitely is very helpful in that envisioning. In addition to having all of these conflicting identities, I would say, between it depending if you're first generation, third generation, fifth generation, just moved here from one place from another. I feel like sometimes there's all these different identities that we believe we need to be, that we are expected to be, that we don't, that we're not. You just talked about, is it Hispanic? Is it Latino? Is it Latinx? Like it just sometimes, instead of helping, it just makes it even messier. And then in addition to that, because I'm living through it right now with a couple of very close people, is the gender part of it, of really owning who you are from a gender perspective, whatever you identify with. But that from a culture perspective has, I mean, in general, it has its challenges, but also from a culture perspective, like there's the double challenge of who we're expected to be, based on how we were raised. What are you seeing? What are your thoughts from your end? What can you share?
This is part of the growing pains of being authentic, right? And growing up in that. But I will tell you that leaders that don't lose their sense of being Latino, don't lose their sense of being authentic, are some of the bravest leaders, but most successful leaders, right? I've been told I'm not Mexican enough. I'm not this enough. I'm not that enough. I'm also not feminine enough, according to folks, because otherwise I wouldn't be running a feminist organization, right? And the assumption is that I hate men if I'm a feminist, right? So there's all these identities and biases that get put on us. And that is their expectation, and that is their load to carry, not ours. So I think being clear on your authentic self, being clear that you are enough, is critical, but also that you are following your purpose. And your purpose will guide you. It's not just a passion, it is your purpose. And what that looks like for you may be different from me. And we have to be okay with it. But I think clearly for us, it is being an authentic Latino, whatever that may look like for you, whether it is the gender non-conforming, whether it is being a woman, whether it is being a man, but realistic, being as authentic as possible and as authentic as you want to be, bringing that forth to the table.
So powerful. And I think that adds on to expectations also, not only our expectations, but trying to meet others' expectations. And we just, and I say we because we have some authors here in the in the chat, launched a book called Extraordinary Latinas for this Hispanic Heritage Month of, stories like yours and like many women that have been resilient and courageous. And somebody reached out to me, a young Latina, saying, I love all these stories of inspiration, but on the other hand, I'm now scared because I don't know if I can live up to those expectations of hearing, all of these great, incredible women saying, you can do it, you can be like all these awesome things. But then that like sometimes in itself becomes overwhelming because of the expectation, because of what if I'm not that extraordinary? What if I'm not that powerful Latina? What if I don't like it just becomes like a lot to handle. And I hadn't thought about it that way. I thought it was more of an inspiration and more of an empowerment, but to her, it actually went the other way. It was like, yes, like I love to see it, but I don't know if I have it in me. What's like the one thing that she and many others that might feel that way can do to at least not pull back, because the expectation might just be too large to handle.
Absolutely. I would say take it step by step. If somebody had told me that I will build a Women's March Foundation 6 years ago to elevate women, that would have been overwhelming for me. There was no way I was going to do that. But when I look back, those small steps I took. So take it step by step. It is like telling someone to run a marathon. Whoa, that's 26 miles. I'm not sure I can do that. But today I'm going to do half a mile. Tomorrow I'm going to do a mile. And so you build up that muscle. You build up that muscle of being confident and know that you are worthy and know that you are enough. So I would say take it day by day, step by step, because it can be overwhelming. What if I'm not that? But what if you are? What if you are, right? So, and realistically, once you start thinking that you can't get there, in my mind, it means that you do want to get there. You just don't know how, right? So I think part of it is step by step, take that one day. What can I do today to feel this way? Whether it's turning on a candle, taking a deep breath, and taking inventory of how fantastic you are. I think that we compare ourselves to other folks that might not even have the same interest as us. Who are you? What do you want to accomplish? And do it step by step. And don't forget, reach out to those mentors, reach out to those girlfriends. They probably think you're pretty fantastic and you don't know it.
That actually is a great segue to another question that I've been asked recently, which is, what if I don't have mentor? Like, how do I, especially, those of us, and I include myself, that are introverts, that might not know how to approach other people, might feel awkward, building networks or going to networking events, might want to have mentors, but don't really know, like, how do I ask somebody to be my mentor? What if they say no? Like, we start with all these, like, what ifs, so then we just stop. But we just talked about the power of networking and the power of us. But then how do you approach that if you have no idea and you just feel like that awkwardness of that's not me?
So here's what is you, right? If you're already attending this, and if you already know of someone attending, we have the power of social media. Reach out and say, hey, I'm looking for a mentor. Can we just have a cup of coffee? I know it's under COVID, but I'm having enough coffees on Zoom to make it work, right? So that networking piece is part of the social media, part of building a LinkedIn profile that says, hey, I'm open to mentoring, I'm open to mentorship. And that is how you start to really do that. Because if I'm not available to mentor, you know what? I know Cynthia Ruiz, I know Carmen Shea, and I know so-and-so. And let's figure out how to build that group. Or I may already have a Facebook group that deals with this, right? So I do think that we may not be networking like we were pre-COVID, but I think there's an opportunity here for us to continue to connect on social media, to continue to grow our network. I have worked with people for years that I've never met, right? For years that I've never met. Why? Because we have the same passion and we connect via LinkedIn, via Facebook, a few on Instagram. But there are a lot of opportunities, even if you are an introvert. If you send me an email that says, I'm an introvert, but I'd like to connect, I mean, that's an email that's getting opened because you are actually coming out of your shell to connect. So I really, really highly recommend you use LinkedIn, you use these social media platforms to network.
Thank you. I would have definitely reached out to you many years ago to do that. Thank you for sharing. We're going to do that information. And the other thing is, oh my God, I'm blanking right now on the question about the networking. Oh, the power of our voices. Same thing. Like I've heard a lot. I do it a lot in terms of elevating our voice and speaking up and really like owning our ground. But then it can become very overwhelming to stand up and to say something. And what if, you know, somebody thinks that I said the wrong thing? Or what if, you know, I make a mistake, and what's that going to do to my image or to how people are viewing me? So there's like this conflicting on the one hand, speak up, elevate your voice, but on the other hand, what if it goes wrong? Because we've seen what happens when sometimes, you know, a tweet goes all wrong and then it seems like the world is falling. What would you recommend?
I recommend to speak your voice. I really do. I think that for me, have I gotten in hot water over stuff? Absolutely. Would I do it any differently? No, because I was being my authentic self. You know, when I talk about, I had someone reach out to me that, you know, why am I saying I'm not an Emily? Well, I'm an Emiliana, and I have that Latina culture within me, so I will not let someone call me Emily. And being unapologetic about that has gotten me in a little bit of trouble, but I wouldn't have it any other way, because in order for me to be seen as an equal and equity, I stand in my authentic self no matter what room I go into. So I don't need to assimilate, we belong. And knowing that you belong. Now, am I disrespectful? No, it's not about being disrespectful. It is about being your authentic self, and no matter what room they put me in, I'm Emiliana, right? And so I think that that's critical. Elevating our voices is also walking into a room as your authentic self, respectful conversation. You know, I've been in rooms where I'm the only C-suite Latina. And what that looks like sometimes is kind of uncomfortable for folks, but I'm not there to make people comfortable. I am there to network as equals with everybody else in that room. So knowing that you have that within you and you must speak up, you must elevate, you must bring more people in the room, may seem like a big task, but that is what we will need to get to equity as Latinas.
I can't see the questions because now I'm on my phone. So I'm just asking Carola if there are questions. If anybody has any questions for Emiliana, please, by all means, put them in the chat, and then Carola can let us know. What would you tell your younger self, if anything?
My younger self, I would say to take on less. I would say to take on less. I did. I own a restaurant group. I own an event production company, but definitely to say no to more things when I was younger. I'm actually getting a little bit better about saying no to things, but I think for a moment, I really thought that I needed to help more people, do more. But realistically speaking, saying no is very powerful, and taking back your time to make sure that you are doing impactful work and following your purpose.
Yes, saying no. That is so hard. So how have you found sort of a work-life, I don't like to call it work-life balance because it's not being a chemical engineer for me, balance is 50-50. But just in general, like a harmony between personal and professional. And now that, self-care and putting ourselves first is also becoming important. What have you found helpful to you?
I think that I have no balance. I'm not even going to say I'm balancing because I'm not. I am, between working and making sure that women have equity, I sort of blend that in. But there are times when I say, okay, at this point, I'm going to disconnect. For example, on Sundays, I will not respond to emails. I will not get on social media, right? But also asking of my partner to do more. With the household, with the kids, to say, hey, how are we equal in this? Because I know during the pandemic, I saw that list of homeschooling and everything. I was like, oh, it's a lot. Not if we split it, right? So basically for me, it's really asking for more help, asking for more folks to step up, because I think as women, we are always asked to do more. With less time, less money, less everything. So realistically speaking, saying, no, I cannot do that, but I will do this, right? Or maybe down the road. And someone said to me, maybe women can't have it all. I disagree. I think we can have it all. Men have it all. Why? Because we're their assistants. And so we can have it all if we request the assistance from others. And I really believe that. Am I 100% in everything? No. However, I do ask for help from my partner, from my assistants, from folks around me in order to have it all.
Yes, the power of asking for help, something that I know that I still need to do that. We're coming down to, the last couple of minutes of having this wonderful conversation. I know that you have a lot that's coming up. You already shared with us. Anything that you'd like to invite our audience, those that are listening right now, this is being recorded, so there are going to be more people listening in afterwards. Any final words or help, or how can we get more involved?
I'm going to say reach out. My organization is womensmarchfoundation.org. In November, hopefully post-pandemic, I know we're still in that, I am launching a podcast called Vida, which is a lifestyle podcast that will talk about being Latina. What does our vida look like, right? How are we living it? What are we doing? How are we getting by? What can we help Latinas with? So it will be called Vida, launching in November. I was supposed to launch a book, but I launched a march last weekend, so that's sort of got derailed a bit there. But my podcast will be on the Latina lifestyle, and talking to experts and talking to folks about what a Latina lifestyle looks like in the United States.
That is awesome. I imagine that's going to be available, everywhere where podcasts live.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being with us today, for sharing your insights, for being such an inspiration, and just empowering us with your thoughts and your stories today and your voice. Thank you so much, Emiliana, for being East Coast to West Coast, and just showing the power of unity and the power of us. Thank you, everybody else.
Thank you, everybody. I'm going to say breathe. Straighten up your crown. You're Latina and you got this. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Emiliana.